Chapter 1. The exhibition at Marleycombe Hall, Marleycombe, was the sort of village that never made the newspapers. Tucked between rolling fields and sleepy woods, it existed in quiet defiance of the 21st century, a place where time ticked slower, and gossip traveled faster than the internet ever could. On a fine spring morning, the villagers gathered at Marleycombe Hall, a grand old estate now mostly used for community events. Mrs. Helena Crossfield, the widowed lady of the manor, had graciously agreed to host this year's Historical Curiosities exhibition, a fundraiser for the village library, which was always on the verge of being defunded by some distant council office dot inside the oak-paneled ballroom. Trestle tables groaned under the weight of dusty antiques, rare books, and peculiar heirlooms. There were rusted bayonets from the Great War, Victorian mourning brooches, a child's rocking horse from 1903, and even, rather controversially, a pair of antique manacles once used in the village. Jailhouse dot, but the item that drew the most curiosity was a small, tarnished brass key. It sat in a glass case lined with red velvet, labeled simply, "The Key That Opens Nothing." Circa 1830. Bit of a gimmick, that, muttered old Tom Braithwaite, the village handyman, scratching his chin. Why keep a key if it don't? Open nothing? It's a riddle, whispered Rosemary Linton, a local schoolteacher with a penchant for folklore. They say it was forged for a door that was never built. Helena's grandfather claimed it was cursed. Beside the key stood Mrs. Crossfield herself, tall, poised, silver-haired, wearing a sapphire brooch that glinted with the same cool aloofness as her smile. She greeted each villager with politeness but little warmth, even in her own home. Helena seemed a visitor in someone else's memory. Among the crowd was a new face, quiet, observant, dressed in an understated gray suit and a Panama hat that looked slightly too crisp for the countryside. "Is that the Belgian detective?" whispered Mr. Aberline, the village postmaster, "the one who solved that poisoning." "In Devon? French, isn't he?" said someone else. Double quotes. No, Southern. "From New Orleans, I believe." The man in question, Benoit Blanc, offered a courteous nod to the murmuring crowd, but said nothing. He stood for a long time before the display case, gazing not at the key, but at its shadow on the velvet. Then, almost absently, he scribbled something in a small notebook, and turned away. By early afternoon, the exhibition was winding down. A soft drizzle had begun outside, and inside, the scent of lemon scones and old paper lingered like memory. Just as the final guests were gathering coats, a shriek pierced the air from the far corridor. It was Daphne Muse, Helena's personal maid. People rushed towards the cry, footsteps echoing off stone walls. At the foot of the narrow servant staircase, Daphne stood trembling, one hand over her mouth, the other pointing. At the base of the stairs lay a body, a man in his 50s, dressed in tweed, spectacles askew. His head was twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide open in terror. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple. It was Gideon Marsh, the local historian, dead. Within minutes, the mood had shifted from Sunday curiosity to somber dread. Mrs. Crossfield stood frozen, one gloved hand gripping the staircase railing. People murmured prayers, but none dared to approach, except one. Benoit Blanc knelt beside the body, his expression unreadable. He did not touch the man. He simply observed. Then he slowly looked up the staircase, then down to the polished floor beneath. His eyes narrowed. A police siren wailed in the distance. What was he doing back there? Someone asked. "He said he was going to fetch his notes," whispered Daphne. "Said he left them in the study, but I thought I saw him heading toward the east wing." No one noticed at first, but the glass case back in the ballroom now stood open, and the key, the one that opened nothing, was gone. Chapter 2. the key that disappeared by the time Inspector Helen Alderton arrived at Marleycombe Hall. The drizzle had thickened into steady rain. Her boots clicked sharply against the flagstones as she stepped inside, trailed by a junior constable with a notepad and the unmistakable air of someone eager not to mess up. The villagers parted like water around a stone as she moved through. Them, tall, tightly wombed, and clearly unimpressed by the faded grandeur of the hall, or the anxious explanations being thrown at her from every direction. "Everyone stays where they are," she announced, raising a hand. "No one leaves the premises. This is now a crime scene." The moment the word crime was spoken aloud, the atmosphere curdled into something darker. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. Rumors, already half-formed, began to fester into accusations. Helena, Crossfield, standing stiffly by the mantelpiece, turned to face the inspector. "I assume you'll need the study and the east wing secured. I can have Daphne show you." Alderton arched an eyebrow. "That would be helpful, Mrs. Crossfield. And the room where Mr. Marsh was found, no one has disturbed the body?" Blanc, who had quietly returned to the ballroom, answered instead. "I took the liberty to examine him briefly. No more than an observer's eye, Inspector. I assure you, the scene remains intact." She looked him over. "You're the detective, aren't you?" "I have been called that," he replied with a gentle southern drawl, "though I must confess, I came today only for curiosity. I did not expect to find myself in the middle of death." Alderton exhaled sharply. No one ever does. At that moment, the constable returned, slightly out of breath. "Ma'am, you need to see this." He led them both to the ballroom where the exhibits stood, or rather, where most of them stood. The case that had once displayed the mysterious key now yawned open. The velvet lining was undisturbed, but the key was gone. Alderton stared. Who had access to this room after the incident? Helena stepped forward, her tone steely. The door was left open. Guests came and went all morning. But I assumed, foolishly it seems, that nothing would be disturbed once Gideon. Once the body was found, Blanc tilted his head. A curious object indeed, to be stolen amidst tragedy. A key said to open nothing, and yet someone saw value in it. "Stolen as a souvenir?" suggested Alderton. "Perhaps," Blanc said, softly, "or perhaps not. You see, in my experience, a key rarely goes missing unless it is meant to open something." She frowned. "It's a piece of folklore." "And yet a man lies dead," Blanc replied, "beside a staircase that no longer connects to anything of importance. In a wing of the house where no one was meant to be, after returning for notes that don't appear to exist, all while a key vanishes." There was a long silence. The constable scribbled furiously. Alderton spoke at last. "We'll need statements from everyone here, names, alibis, movements from the last hour." Helena gave a short nod. "Of course. I'll have tea brought to the drawing room. No one will leave until you've had what you need." As the villagers shuffled toward the drawing room, glancing over their shoulders like schoolchildren under suspicion, Benoit Blanc remained in place. His gaze drifted to the empty case, to the deep scratch marks around the brass latch, to a single fingerprint smudged faintly on the glass. "Curious," he murmured to himself. "It is always the things said to mean nothing that most." Outside, thunder rumbled distantly over Marleycombe. Somewhere within the old estate, the truth sat quietly, waiting, behind an unopened door, inside a forgotten drawer, or perhaps deep within someone's heart. Blanc turned his notebook over and wrote one line in delicate cursive. "A man killed for a key that opens nothing or everything." Chapter 3. Tea, Lies, and Half-Memorison. The drawing room of Marleycombe Hall. Tea was served with all the grace expected of English gentility. Silver pots, clinking china, and slices of Victoria sponge that no one touched. The atmosphere, however, was anything but civil. Inspector Alderton took the large wingback chair by the fireplace, a place normally reserved for the late Lord Crossfield. Her notebook lay open on her knee. The villagers sat stiffly on the brocade settees and floral armchairs, their faces pale with unease. Their teacups trembling slightly, Mrs. Crossfield presided like a reluctant queen, her hands folded in her lap. Her gaze swept the room, cool and assessing, as if measuring each person for a crime they hadn't yet confessed. Benoit Blanc stood by the window, half turned to the rain. He didn't speak. He simply watched, the way someone might study a painting, waiting for the hidden face to emerge from the brushstrokes. The first to be questioned was Daphne Muse, the maid. "I went to the kitchen," she said in a quiet voice, twisting her hands in her apron, "to fetch more lemonade for the garden table. I didn't know Mr. Marsh had gone upstairs. I only screamed when I saw—" Her voice faltered. Someone passed her a tissue. She dabbed her eyes, then added, "But I thought I saw him heading toward the east wing earlier. Before the body was found, I thought it odd, but he's always poking about." "What business did Mr. Marsh have in the east wing?" Alderton asked, looking toward Helena. Helena's expression tightened. "None. That part of the house is closed. It hasn't been used in years, not since my husband's death." "And the key?" Alderton asked. "Who handled it last?" "No one," Helena said. "It was placed in the case yesterday, locked. I was the only one with the key to the case itself." Benoit turned from the window. "And yet the case was not forced." Helena looked at him. "Are you implying I removed it myself?" He smiled politely. "I imply nothing, madam. I merely observe the inconsistency between secure glass and missing contents." At that, Reverend Tilling, a thin man with the startled eyes of a nervous ferret, leaned forward. "If I may," he said, clearing his throat, "Gideon did speak to me earlier this week about the key. He said he believed it had connections to the chapel, to the foundation stones, perhaps. That it was symbolic of something ... older than the house?" Alderton asked, raising an eyebrow. The Reverend nodded. "Much older." Murmurs spread across the room. "Gideon was chasing shadows," said Rosemary Linton, the schoolteacher. "He was always trying to rewrite history, hoping to find some hidden significance in everything. Last month he claimed he'd discovered pagan carvings behind the village bakery." The postmaster chuckled nervously. "He once told me my letterbox was from the Templar period. It's from Wicks." "And yet," Blank said gently, "the man is dead, and a key is missing. Even if he chased shadows, something caught up with him." Inspector Alderton leaned forward. "Did anyone else leave the main room before the body was discovered?" There was a pause. Then a single voice spoke up. "I did," said Dr. Julia Reeves, the village's only physician. She was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a smoker's rasp to her voice. "I went to take a phone call, a patient. I used the back corridor, so I wouldn't disturb the displays." "What time?" "Just after 1. I came back 10 minutes later. The scream came shortly after." "Did you see Gideon?" "No," she said slowly. "But I heard voices. 2 people. I assumed it was staff." Alderton scribbled a note. Blank stepped forward, his voice mild. "Dr. Reeves, you've lived here long?" "All my life," she replied. "Why?" He gave a soft smile. "Then you'll know better than anyone what lies in the east wing." A hush fell. Helena spoke, her tone tight. "There is nothing in the east wing but dust, locked rooms, and bad memories. Please stop dragging up ghosts." But it was too late. The room had shifted. You could feel it, like a string pulled too tight. Secrets had begun to stir. As tea cooled and rain lashed against the windows, One thing became increasingly clear to Benoit Blanc. This was no random killing. This was an old wound. Reopened. And the key, long thought useless, had unlocked something no one was ready to face. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Wing. That evening, long after the villagers had been allowed to return to their homes, albeit with warnings not to leave the village, Benoit Blanc found himself wandering the dim corridors of Marleycombe Hall. The storm had passed, leaving behind a mist that hugged the ground like a secret. The old house creaked with memory. The police had sealed off the east wing, but Blanc, with Helena Crossfield's reluctant permission, had requested 1 hour alone in the estate. She had hesitated, then handed him an iron keyring with trembling fingers. "There's nothing to find," she said quietly. "Just echoes." But Blanc didn't believe in empty spaces. Not really. The east wing was colder than the rest of the house. The wallpaper had peeled in strips, revealing older paper underneath faded florals, giving way to darker, more archaic patterns. The carpets were threadbare, the air musty with disuse. Doors lined the hallway like watchers. Some were locked. Some opened into nothing but cobwebs and dust. Blanc paused outside one door that bore a peculiar mark above the frame, a small carved shape almost erased by time, a circle intersected by a line. He traced it with his finger, then turned the handle. Inside was a room that had once been a study. He could tell by the built-in shelves and the ghost of a desk shape imprinted on the faded rug. A cracked leather chair slumped in the corner. Books lay scattered, most untouched for years, but something had disturbed this place recently. There were footprints in the dust. 2 sets. One leading in, one leading out, and something else, barely visible in the far corner of the room. A thin strip of red velvet, torn like the lining of a box. Blanc knelt and picked it up delicately. He held it between his fingers for a long moment, then slipped it into his coat pocket. His eyes moved to the fireplace, where soot had been disturbed. Recently. Something had been burned. Rising slowly, he moved to the hearth and used his penknife to lift a piece of scorched paper. Only a few letters remained. Ehrlich Society? He frowned. A sound behind him made him turn. The floorboard outside the room creaked. But when he stepped into the hallway, it was empty. He stood still, listening. Then, another creak, this time from the floor above. He moved with quiet precision, climbing the staircase that groaned with every step. The upper landing smelled of mothballs and forgotten perfume. At the end of the corridor was a single door, painted black. It was ajar. He pushed it open gently. The room beyond was dark, but moonlight spilled through thin curtains, illuminating a strange scene. A mirror, tall and antique, facing inward toward the wall. On the frame, etched in gilt, was a Latin inscription worn nearly smooth. Nearby stood an old writing desk. Upon it, a closed leather-bound journal. Blanc reached for it but paused. He took out a handkerchief and opened it carefully. Inside were pages of tidy script, notes, sketches of keys, floor plans of the manor, and at the top of one page, underlined twice, the door that was never built. He flipped to the next page, where Gideon Marsh had written, in all capital letters, "The key opens the room that does not exist." Just then, a noise behind him, the whisper of movement, made him spin. But no one was there, not only the mirror. And, for the briefest second, as he looked into it, he thought he saw a second reflection beside his own. A woman. Face pale, eyes wide, then gone. He closed the journal and left the room without a word. Downstairs, Inspector Alderton was waiting in the foyer, coat on, pen in hand. "You were supposed to have 1 hour," she said. "It's been 2. Blanc handed her the velvet scrap and the scorched paper. "I believe Gideon Marsh found something. Not just an object, a secret, one someone wanted to keep buried. And the key? I believe it never opened a door in the house as it stands now, he said, but a door that should have existed. A room removed, or never built. Alderton's brow furrowed. Why would someone kill over that? Blanc glanced up the staircase once more, his voice low. Because sometimes, Inspector ... the most dangerous things are not what we hide behind locked doors, but what we try to pretend was never there to begin with. Chapter 5. The Society That Vanished by Morning. The fog over Marleycombe had lifted, but not the weight that hung in the air. The village awoke to a kind of uneasy quiet, the kind that follows tragedy but precedes truth. In the bakery, conversations were hushed. In the post office, eyes lingered longer than usual. And at Marleycombe Hall, Benoit Blanc sat at the long, unused breakfast table with a cold cup of coffee and Gideon, Marsh's journal open before him. The pages were meticulously written. Not the scrawled obsession of a madman, but the careful recording of a man circling something he didn't yet understand. Names, sketches, newspaper clippings, symbols. There was one name that appeared again and again, the Sherlock Society. According to Gideon's notes, it had been a secretive intellectual group founded in the mid-19th century by several local aristocrats and scholars, including, intriguingly, Helena Crossfield's great-grandfather, Edgar Price Halliway. The society had supposedly disbanded after a fire destroyed part of Marleycombe Hall in 1891. The East Wing. No full records existed, but Gideon had apparently uncovered letters hidden in the archives of the village library, suggesting that the society had constructed a hidden meeting room in the manor, a room only accessible via a concealed mechanism, a room removed from blueprints, a room no one ever rebuilt, a door removed but not erased, Gideon had written, a key made for memory, not for locks. Blanc closed the journal, his mind worrying. Helena Crossfield had insisted the East Wing held nothing. But if her family had once been part of this secret society, she might not just be hiding knowledge. She might be protecting it. At that moment, Daphne Muse entered the room quietly with a tray of fresh coffee and toast. She set it down without a word, but hesitated as she turned to leave. You knew Mr. Marsh well, didn't you? Blanc asked gently. Daphne froze. Not well, sir, but he was kind to me. Never talked down. He'd always say hello when I came through the village. Blanc looked at her carefully. Did you ever see him in the East Wing? She hesitated. Once, a few weeks ago. I thought I'd heard someone up there and went to check. He was just standing in the hallway, looking at the wall like he expected something to appear. Said he was listening for forgotten things. Blanc gave a soft nod. And the lady of the house? Mrs. Crossfield doesn't go near that wing. She has her reasons. And what are those? Daphne's eyes flicked toward the window. Her husband died in that part of the house. Years ago. Fell from the upper landing. No one ever talks about it. But after that, she had the entire section locked and sealed. Blanc's eyes sharpened. Was it ruled an accident? It was. But the staff always whispered that he'd found something he shouldn't have. A shadow passed over her face, and then she added, almost as an afterthought, he was asking about the same thing Gideon was, about the society. And that key. Blanc stood slowly. The room felt suddenly colder, though the sun had begun to stream through the windows. Thank you, Miss Muse, he said quietly. You've helped more than you know. That afternoon, Inspector Alderton met him outside the Marleycombe library, her arms crossed tightly over her coat. I've looked into the Sherlock Society, she said. Nothing official. No registry, no articles, no minutes. Just ghost stories. Blanc smiled faintly. It seems Marleycombe is built on them. They entered the library, which smelled of dust, old pages, and lavender polish. Miss Greta Ponsby, the librarian, squinted at them from behind her desk. We're looking for any historical references to the Sherlock Society. Alderton said. Ponsby sniffed. Old Gideon Marsh practically lived here, chasing that nonsense. Left a stack of files in the reading room, never collected them. She pointed with a shaky hand. Second table, under the lamp. Blanc and Alderton approached. A folder lay there, thick with photocopies and yellowed originals. As they spread the papers out, one particular page caught their attention. A diagram, hand-drawn, of Marleycombe Hall before the fire in 1891. There, between the library and the chapel corridor, was a small rectangle. No label. No door dot, just a space that had once existed. And then, beneath the diagram, in Gideon's handwriting, the room without a name. Still there. Just hidden. Key must align with chapel wall. Blanc leaned back, tapping the edge of the paper thoughtfully. A locked room with no door. A society no one remembers. A key no one values. And a man who died for all three. Alderton looked at him. You think Gideon found the room? I think he came close enough that someone couldn't risk him getting any closer. She folded her arms. And who would kill for a forgotten room? Blanc's eyes met hers. Someone who never forgot it. Chapter 6. A widow's silence. The drawing room at Marleycombe Hall had not changed in years. The same portraits. The same china on the mantel. The same sense of carefully arranged grief. The light filtered through thick curtains, casting. The room in gold and shadow-dot Helena. Crossfield sat by the fire, not because she was cold, but because she always had. It was where she had sat after her husband's death, where condolence letters had been read, where polite pity had been served with lemon biscuits and sherry. Benoit Blanc entered without hurry, a file tucked beneath one arm and Gideon's journal. In his hand, Mrs. Crossfield, he began, I would like to ask you about Edgar Price Halloway. Helena's eyes did not shift. My great-grandfather? Indeed. A founding member of the Sherlock Society, if Mr. Marsh's research is accurate. Now she looked at him, not startled, but resigned. That nonsense again. You knew. He said gently. Her shoulders didn't move, but something tightened in her voice. My husband was fascinated by it, spent years trying to prove it existed. I humored him, of course. It was a distraction. Until he started speaking in riddles, drawing maps, staying up all night. He believed there was a hidden room in this house. Helena said nothing for a long time. Then he died for it. Blanc took a seat opposite her, folding his hands. In his lap. Do you believe that? She looked away. The staircase rail had been loose for months. I told him to stop prowling around up there like a child chasing ghosts. But he wouldn't let it go. Said there was something inside the house, something that had been left behind. What did you do after his death? I had the east wing sealed. Not because I believed in curses or conspiracies, but because I couldn't walk through it without hearing him. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. I buried the obsession with him. Or tried to, but Gideon Marsh exhumed it. Yes, she whispered. He came to me, asking questions. Thought he was being clever, discovering connections no one else had. I warned him. I told him some doors don't want to be opened. Blanc leaned forward. Did you warn him or threaten him? Helena's eyes narrowed, the faintest flicker of fire returning. You think I killed him? I think you know more than you're saying. She stood, slowly. There are things in this house that should remain forgotten, Mr. Blanc, and some memories that cannot be rebuilt, no matter how many keys you find. He rose with her. But the room exists, doesn't it? Helena didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the fireplace, lifted the clock from the mantel. and pressed something underneath it. A panel clicked behind the bookshelf. She didn't look at him when she spoke. My husband found it. The mechanism. He said it needed 3 things: the right pressure, the right time, and the right key. She turned to face him. I only know 2 of the 3. Blanc looked toward the now shifted bookcase. Behind it, a narrow cavity opened. Into darkness, cold air rushed out like a sigh. And Gideon? Helena closed her eyes. He found the key. By that night, Marleycombe was again cloaked in mist. Benoit Blanc stood before the hidden passage, the old iron key in his pocket, the one Gideon had hidden in the false bottom of his bag, the one Alderton had found with Gideon's burned documents. It was heavy, colder than brass should be. Turned it over in his hand. The room that does not exist. Behind him, Inspector Alderton stepped forward. You sure about this? Blanc didn't look away from the darkness. No. He placed the key into the narrow, ancient-looking lock embedded in the stone wall behind the shelf. It turned with resistance, then gave a sudden, decisive click. A section of wall shuddered and slid inward. What lay beyond was not dust or decay, but something preserved. Shelves, tables, candles melted down to stubs. A single chair in the center of the room beneath a glass dome, and on the table beside it, an open journal identical in style to Gideon's, marked The Sherlock Society Final Minutes. Blanc stepped inside, and behind him, somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, not from age, from someone watching. Chapter 7. The Final Minutes. The hidden chamber was no more than 20 feet across, but it breathed with the weight of centuries. Dust had settled in dignified layers, undisturbed by time or cleaning. The air was dry, still. Time itself seemed to pause once one stepped inside. Benoit Blanc moved carefully, his footsteps soft against the ancient floorboards. The light from Alderton's torch flickered over the uneven stone walls, revealing painted crests, faded Latin mottos, and shelves stacked with decaying leather-bound books. On a pedestal in the corner stood a tarnished brass plaque, Veritas, Ultima, the final truth. Blanc approached the center of the room where the chair sat beneath the glass dome. The dome had long since cracked, and spiderwebs clung to its edges. On the small table beside it, the open journal lay like a confession. He lifted it gently, brushing off the dust. The last entry was dated January 17th, 1891, 2 days before. The fire that destroyed the East Wing. The Society agrees. It must be sealed. The truth buried. Our purpose has been compromised. One among us no longer acts in silence. The key must be hidden. Let the room vanish. Let Marleycombe forget. Below it, in different ink, a final line had been scrawled, not a continuation, but a warning. He who remembers will be watched. Blanc's fingers paused on the page. Someone was silenced back then, Alderton said behind him. Now Gideon. Same pattern, same motive. Not silence, Blanc murmured. Control. The society disbanded not because they failed, but because one of them broke the pact. But someone, a descendant, perhaps, never let go. They've been watching, waiting. He looked around the room. Symbols lined the upper edges of the walls. Circles intersected with lines. Keys inside triangles. Sunbursts with broken edges. Many matched sketches in Gideon's journal. This was not just a society of historians, Blanc said. They were protecting something. Knowledge? A legacy? A secret? Alderton gestured to the back of the chamber. There's a door here. Bricked over. Blanc walked to it. Indeed, the shape of an old wooden frame had been roughly sealed with stones and mortar. The craftsmanship was deliberate, but not professional. Done in haste. Gideon must have discovered this, he said quietly. He wanted to publish it, reveal it. He found the key, opened the case, and followed it here. And someone followed. Him, Alderton said, and made sure he never spoke. Blanc turned to face her. But who? Who had access? Who believed enough in this forgotten oath to kill? They left the chamber in silence, resealing the passage behind them. Back in the main house, the corridors felt even more ominous. The rain had returned, tapping on the windows like fingers. Alderton left a phone in the Discovery till her superiors. Blanc remained in the hallway, staring at a painting of Edgar Price Holloway, a man with sharp eyes and a thin, secretive mouth. Below, the portrait, a brass plaque read, "To preserve is to protect." He was about to turn away when he heard it. The softest sound. Click. He spun. A shadow moved at the end of the corridor. Blanc gave chase, footsteps echoing on stone, coat flaring behind him. He turned the corner, empty. Only a single door remained open. Swaying slightly. It led into the old music room. Inside, silence. He stepped carefully, scanning the shadows. Then he saw it, on the piano stool, laid with deliberate care. Gideon Marsh's missing notebook. The original. Not the copy. Blanc approached slowly. He reached out, then paused. Pinned beneath it was a single, aged photograph. 5 men in robes, standing beside a wooden chair and the same glass dome. In the center of the image, Edgar Price Holloway. On his lapel, the same symbol, a key. In a sunburst, and behind them, barely visible, a young servant, holding a tray. Blanc recognized the face. He had seen it once before. In a different frame. In a photograph on the wall in the Crossfield Gallery. It was Helena Crossfield's father. Chapter 8. The heir to Silence Blanc stood in the middle of the music room, staring at the photograph like it was whispering to him. As shadows from the rain-washed windows fell across the floor in long, wavering lines, like the stretched fingers of a buried truth trying to claw its way out. Helena Crossfield's father, a servant in the photograph, but present during the final days of the Sherlock Society. He was young then, barely out of boyhood. His posture was careful, almost reverent. Though not one of the cloaked members, he had been allowed in the room, the secret room. He had witnessed the final meeting. And then, years later, he had passed the house, the stories, and the silence to his daughter. Helena. Blanc did not move immediately. He sat instead at the edge of the piano bench, turning the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, a single phrase, "It must never be opened again." He pocketed the photo, gently closed Gideon's original notebook, and stood, only to find Helena Crossfield standing in the doorway. She didn't flinch. Her face was as composed as ever, but her eyes were no longer distant. They were focused, watchful. "You found it," she said quietly. "I did?" "I warned him," she said, stepping into the room. "Just like I warned you." Blanc nodded. "Yes, but Gideon did not stop. And now he is dead." Helena's hands were clasped in front of her, the same way her father's were in the photograph. "You think I killed him?" "I think," Blanc said carefully, "that you were raised to believe certain truths were sacred, that some doors should never be opened. Your father was there, wasn't he? At the Society's final gathering." She didn't deny it. "He was 17, she said softly. "They let him bring in the wine. He saw everything, and he never recovered." "What did they bury in that room?" Helena's mouth twitched, not into a smile, but into something closer to despair. "Not treasure, not evidence, just knowledge. Knowledge they believed could change how the village saw itself, how power moved, how faith bent. And your family kept the key hidden ever since." "No," she said. "We didn't hide it, we protected it. Like a scab you don't pick, no matter how much it itches." Blanc stepped forward. Gideon didn't see a scab. He saw a legacy. A secret society that once shaped the village, maybe the region, and then erased itself. He thought the truth belonged to everyone. Because Gideon believed in history, she said, voice trembling now. But I lived with the damage. My father spent 40 years waking in cold sweats. And when my husband picked up the same threads, I watched him unravel too. Blanc's tone softened. So you tried to end it. You sealed the wing. Locked the memory away. I wanted it to stop, she whispered. But it didn't stop, because someone else didn't want it to. Helena's head rose slowly, eyes narrowing. You're not saying it was me. No, Blanc said. I think you feared it. I think you would have warned Gideon again and again. But someone else followed him. Someone who wanted the key, not to bury the past, but to use it. Helena's breath caught. Blanc continued. Who else knew about your father's role? Who did your husband confide in before his death? Who believed in the society's power? Enough to kill for it? Helena stared at him. Slowly, she shook her head. No, no. It can't be. He was just a boy. Who? She didn't answer right away. She stepped backward, lowered herself into the chair, and covered her mouth. With a trembling hand. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse. My nephew, she said. Oliver. Blanc froze. I raised him after his parents died. He lived in this house until university. He always asked questions about the East Wing. My father used to tell him. Bedtime stories about the hidden room, said he was the last watcher. I thought they were just tales. But Oliver, he always believed. Blanc felt a chill work its way down his spine. He remembered the earlier gathering, the villagers murmuring in corners, Helena's nephew standing near the ballroom display, seemingly disinterested, chatting easily with the guests. Well-spoken, quiet, confident and he had been in the house. The day Gideon died, where is he now? Blanc asked. Helena's eyes filled with dread. He said he was heading back to London last night, but he hasn't called. Blanc stood. Then we may be running late, Mrs. Crossfield, because I believe your nephew did not go to London. She looked up at him. I believe he never left Marleycombe at all. Chapter 9. The last watcher by the time, Inspector Alderton. Arrived back at Marleycombe Hall, Benoit Blanc was already in motion. The fire was still glowing faintly in the drawing-room grate, casting long shadows over the furniture, but the mood in the house had shifted. Tension now pulsed through the walls like electricity. He was here all along, Blanc said briskly as Alderton entered. Oliver Crossfield, Helena's nephew. He never left the village. Are you sure? She asked. He was at the exhibition the day Gideon died. His coat was still hanging in the cloakroom. His car never left the estate grounds. And theirs. More. He grew up in this house. He knows it better than anyone. Helena sat silently in the corner, looking smaller than ever. Blanc continued. He idolized the society, believed he was its heir, that he was meant to restore it, not erase it. That journal of Gideon's? It didn't frighten him. It validated him. He must have followed Gideon, stolen the key, waited. Alderton swore under her breath. Where the hell is he now? Blanc moved to the window and drew the curtain aside. Rain glistened across the gravel drive. There's only one place he'd go. Somewhere off record, somewhere sacred to the society and to him. Helena raised her eyes slowly. The old rectory. Both. Turned to her. It belonged to the Crossfields until the 1970s, she said. It's been empty for decades. But my father kept it in the family. And Oliver, he used to spend hours there. He said the society left things behind. Alderton grabbed her coat. I'm taking a unit. Blanc held up a hand. No sirens, no drama. If he believes we're hunting him, he'll vanish. Then what? Blanc looked back at the fire, eyes reflecting the flickering embers. We let him believe he's won. The old rectory lay on the edge of Marley Combe, where the trees thickened and the paths narrowed into forgotten tracks. It had once been elegant, red brick, tall chimneys, stained glass windows. But now ivy clung to its walls like a suffocating hand, and its windows stared blankly into the night. Blank and Alderton approached in silence, their torches dimmed. The gate was unlatchd. The door was ajar. Inside. Dust lay thick over everything, but someone had passed through recently. A boot print in the hallway, a candle stub on a windowsill, a tin mug still warm. In the center of the old study, a circle of books had been laid out on the floor, like some kind of ritual. Symbols chalked into the boards echoed those seen in the secret chamber, the society's code. And in the middle of it all, standing tall, arms folded behind his back, was Oliver Crossfield. He turned slowly, like he'd been expecting them. "Mr. Blank," he said, "I wondered how long it would take you." Oliver was in his 30s, well-dressed and eerily calm. There was none of the nervous defiance of the guilty, just a quiet certainty, like a man who believes himself righteous. Alderton stepped forward. "You never left the village. You followed. Gideon Marsh. You were in the house the night he died." He looked at her, bemused. Gideon was going to destroy something that was never his to expose. "You killed him." Oliver tilted his head. He opened the door, but he couldn't see what it meant. He treated it like history, a puzzle to solve, not a legacy to protect. Blanc's voice cut through the stillness. "What was in that? Room, Mr. Crossfield?" Oliver's gaze flicked to him, and for a moment something fierce and ancient passed across his face. "Power," he said. "Order, purpose." The society held secrets not just about Marleycombe, but about how knowledge moves, how truth bends. My great-grandfather knew that. They all did. They didn't disband. They hid. They left it all for someone worthy. "And that was you?" Alderton asked. Oliver stepped forward. "I was chosen. Groomed in a way. My uncle believed, even if he feared it. My aunt, she tried to forget. But forgetting doesn't erase blood." Blanc's eyes didn't leave his. "So you followed Gideon, took the key, killed him." "I didn't plan to," Oliver said. "I just meant to scare him. But he ran. Slipped the stairs." He shook his head. "It was chaos." "But then," Blanc said softly, "you opened the room." Oliver's expression hardened. "I did what they asked. I remembered." Alderton raised her hand. "That's enough. You're coming with us." He didn't resist. As the constables emerged from the trees and entered the rectory, Oliver raised his hands slowly. There was no fear on his face, only the sadness of a man who believes the world has misunderstood him. As he was led away into the rain, Benoit Blanc remained in the doorway of the rectory, staring at the symbols on the floor. The society had tried to disappear, but some truths can't be buried. Some keys will always be found. Chapter 10. After the storm, Marleycombe, once so settled in its rhythm of garden fetes and quiet gossip, had grown restless in the days following Oliver Crossfield's arrest. Some villagers avoided the subject altogether. Others whispered with renewed vigor about hidden rooms, secret societies, and the boy who always stared too long at locked doors. But none could deny the sharp, final feeling that something old had ended. And yet, for Benoit Blanc, something still didn't sit right. He returned to Marleycombe Hall on a quiet morning, the sky washed in the soft gray of an English summer. The storm had passed, and the roses along the gravel drive bloomed without knowing the darkness they had outlasted. Helena Crossfield met him at the front step. She looked thinner, wearier, but freer somehow, like someone who had finally let go of a memory that had weighed too long. "Tea?" she asked. Blanc nodded. They sat in the conservatory, The glass fogged gently from the kettle's heat. Outside, the bees moved lazily among the blooms. Inside, truth settled between them like a third guest. "I keep thinking about my father," Helena said quietly. "He was never the same after the society ended. I used to think he was just haunted by the past. But now I wonder if he feared. It would come back. It nearly did," Blanc said. "Through your nephew." She shook her head. "Oliver was a bright child. Too bright, maybe. My husband filled his head with stories, and he took them as prophecy. When he lost his parents, I tried to protect him from all of it." "You tried to forget," Blanc corrected gently. She gave a hollow laugh. "Yes, and look where that led." They drank in silence for a moment. Then Helena looked up. "There's something I haven't told you." Blanc tilted his head. "Go on." "After the society disbanded, my great-grandfather didn't just lock away the room. He buried something else. I found it years ago, hidden behind a false panel in the library. I was too afraid to read it then. But maybe you should see it." She returned a few minutes later with a slim black box, bound with twine. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a manuscript. Fragile, handwritten, marked, "The Map of Hidden Speech, Sherlock Society, Private Doctrines." Blanc leafed through it carefully. Symbols, riddles, phrases that bordered on mystical, yet were rooted in psychology, persuasion, and manipulation. "This," he said slowly, "is what they were protecting." Helena nodded. "My husband believed it was a tool, a way of decoding influence, not magic, just ancient knowledge applied through generations. He said if used correctly, it could bend trust, perception, even memory." Blanc set the manuscript down, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it would turn truth into currency, she said, and people into pawns. Now it made sense. Vivian's obsession, Oliver's conviction, the society's fear. The key hadn't opened a room. It had opened a way of thinking. Blanc stood and walked to the window. "You must destroy it," he said quietly. "Locking it away won't work. Not again. You've seen what that breeds." Helena nodded slowly. "I will." He turned to her. "And if not for you, then for those who come next." She smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd seen on her. "For those who don't need keys to feel free." Later that day, Benoit Blanc departed Marlicombe on the afternoon train. The village station was as quiet as ever, but the air felt subtly changed, as if the village, too, had exhaled something long held in. He watched the countryside roll past his window, green and open and endless. The murder was solved. The killer caught. And yet, the real mystery, the one that began long before Gideon Marsh ever opened the case, was one that would never fit cleanly into police reports or news headlines. It was a story about power, about inheritance, about how we pass fear along like heirlooms, and about how some doors should never be built at all. As the train picked up speed, Benoit Blanc closed his eyes and let Marlicombe fade behind him. But the key, the one that opened nothing, remained in his coat. Pocket. Just in case. Chapter 11. Ashes in the Hearth. The following week, a quiet ritual took place at Marlicombe Hall. Helena Crossfield, true to her word, summoned a solicitor, a clergyman, and 2 witnesses, all villagers who had known her for decades. No constables, no press. Just 5 people in an old library who understood the weight of what they were about to do. On the hearthstone, the manuscript lay in its black box, bound still in twine and wrapped in its protective cloth. The fire in the grate burned hotter than usual, fed with thick logs and dry branches from the estate's fallen orchard. No speeches were given. No blessings read. Helena simply stepped forward, unwrapped the doctrine of the Sherlock Society, and laid it, page by page, into the flames. Each one curled, blackened, and disappeared, not instantly, but in the slow, reluctant way of things long hidden. The symbols cracked and smoked. The ink melted into illegibility. The fire hissed dot, and then it was gone dot as the smoke cleared. Helena stood straighter. "It's finished," she said, but far from Marleycombe, in a small London flat lined with books, maps, and newspaper clippings, someone else stirred. Vivian. Marsh had never liked small towns. Too much silence. Too much watching. When her brother Gideon had told her he was going back to Marleycombe to complete the work, she had laughed, gently, but with real concern. "You're not a knight of the realm, Gid," she had said over tea. "You're a history teacher." Not a chosen one. But then came the silence. The unanswered texts. The call from the police dot her brother was gone. Slipped on the stairs. Case closed dot except it wasn't, because Gideon had sent her copies. Not all of them, but enough dot his last. Envelope had arrived 2 days before his death. Unmarked, no note inside, just photocopies. Pages of a journal. Sketches of rooms. A list of names. A crude map of Marleycombe Hall, with one circle marked in red and labeled. Not where they built, but where they buried. Vivian had cried, of course. She'd mourned. And then she'd done what no one else had. She kept reading. Now at her kitchen table, she looked over the files again. The ash and ink sketches. The riddles. The symbols. And beneath them all, the question that burned more fiercely than ever. Why would someone kill to stop the truth? She picked up a small brass key. One Gideon had mailed her months before with no context. Its teeth were unlike any standard lock. And it was cold. Always cold. Vivian leaned forward and opened her laptop. She typed Benoit Blanc into the search bar. She wasn't ready yet, but she would be. Whatever Gideon had uncovered, it wasn't finished. Not yet. Chapter 12. The Sisters' Ledger. Vivian. Marsh had always lived in the shadow of her brother's curiosity. While Gideon had searched for secrets, she had catalogued them. While he had been drawn to locked doors, she had written the inventory of the keys. But this was something else. She stared at the photocopied pages again, now spread across her dining table like a jigsaw puzzle that refused to take shape. Outside, the sound of London's traffic filtered faintly through her second-story flat, but inside there was only silence. And possibility. In the center of the table sat Gideon's brass key, still faintly smelling of the envelope glue that had sealed it. It wasn't just a key to a door. Vivian was beginning to believe it was a key to a pattern. She flipped back through his notes. One page in particular had always puzzled her, a sketch of 3 concentric circles with an arrow, pointing inward from the outer rim. Around the edge, Gideon had scrawled, "History folds inwards." The room isn't the center is missing. Vivian didn't claim to understand half of Gideon's theories, but something about that line had never left her. And now, with news of Oliver Crossfield's arrest, she had begun to piece together a chilling possibility. What if the Society's hidden room wasn't the end of the secret? What if it was just the first page? She reached for her phone, dialing a contact she'd saved months earlier under the name Blank Urgent. Her brother had included it in a sealed envelope with a note that simply said, "If anything happens to me, call him. He sees through things." A phone rang twice. Then a calm, unmistakably Southern voice answered. "Vivian Marsh?" "Yes. I am sorry to call without warning. I wasn't sure you'd answer." "I always answer for the dead," said Benoit Blanc. "And I reckon your brother still has something to say." 2 days later, Vivian stood in the rare documents room at the British Library, where Gideon had spent the last winter chasing old maps and private letters. She had gained access through a favor owed to a former colleague. There, in the light of a reading lamp, she laid out her theory to Blanc. The room at Marleycombe wasn't the society's first, she said. It was their last, a safe house, a burial ground, but their influence extended further. Gideon believed there were 7 locations tied to the society, 7 sites across England where key members had hidden elements of their doctrine. Blanc listened, hands folded, his eyes never leaving her. And the key? He asked. She held it up. This isn't for the room they found in Marleycombe. It's for the next one. Blanc said nothing at first. Then, have you found it? Vivian pulled out a faded reproduction of a land survey map from 1878. In the margins, Gideon had circled an estate outside Cotsley, a village in North Yorkshire. A manor now in ruins, sold off, divided. But once, long ago, home to one Sir Rowland Thatchmore, another original member of the Sherlock Society. The manor burned in 1914, Vivian said, but not before Thatchmore had a chapel built behind. The main estate, a private chapel. Blanc leaned forward. Vivian lowered her voice. It's still standing. That night, as London's lights glittered across the Thames, a different kind of map unfolded in Benoit Blanc's mind. A map of ideas, of motives that refused to die, of keys that opened not doors, but narratives. And someone, perhaps many someones, had decided long ago that knowledge should be power, and power should be hidden. Now it was waking up again, and the key that opened nothing? It might soon open everything. Chapter 13. The Chapel in the Earth. Train to Cotsley hummed steadily through the Yorkshire countryside, its carriages rocking gently over old iron rails. Outside, the land rolled in deep, green swells, hills stitched with dry stone walls and scattered with ruined farmsteads that looked centuries forgotten. Inside, Benoit Blanc sat opposite Vivian Marsh in the near-empty first-class carriage. Between them lay an old tin map case, a leather-bound notebook, and a flask of scalding coffee. Vivian was still speaking, her fingers lightly tracing a crease in the map Gideon had marked in the months before his death. The chapel was built by Thatchmore in 1863, she said. Privately consecrated, no congregation. And after the manor burned down in 1914, the entire property was bought by a family called Greysteel. They've held it since. Though the house is gone, they never sold the land. Blanc raised an eyebrow. That sort of loyalty suggests significance. Vivian nodded. Or a pact. They fell into silence as the train whistled through a tunnel. When it emerged, the land had changed. The air felt thinner. Wilder. By mid-morning, they arrived. In Cotsley, a village smaller and even sleepier than Marleycombe. The train platform had no roof, and the ticket office had been converted into a flower shop. Vivian had arranged a driver, an older man named Albee, who greeted them with a nod and a barely contained sense of curiosity. Don't get many visitors. Looking for the Greysteel chapel, he muttered as they loaded their bags. Blanc smiled politely. You know it then? Aye, folks don't go near it. Some say it's cursed, some say it's holy. Either way, it's locked tighter than the bishop's brandy. The road to the Greysteel property turned narrow and rough after half a mile. Tall hedges bowed over the path like they were shielding it from the sky. Eventually, the car could go no further, and they continued on foot, boots crunching gravel and soft earth. At last, the chapel emerged from the mist, a stone structure, low and narrow, with a steep roof and a rusted bell hanging silently in a moss-covered arch. It looked abandoned, but only at first glance. Vivian approached the heavy oak door and ran her fingers along the ironwork. This isn't Victorian, she murmured. This lock was replaced. Blanc knelt, studying the keyhole. And very recently, too. See here, the metal hasn't oxidized, and the hinges were oiled within the month. He rose and removed Gideon's brass key from his pocket. Vivian, drew a breath. You think it will fit? I think, said Blanc, that someone wanted Gideon to believe this was the next step, perhaps to lead him here, perhaps to stop him short, but we won't know unless we turn it. He inserted the key dot. It turned smoothly dot with a soft click. The door swung open. The inside of the chapel was dark and bone-cold. The windows had long since fogged with grime. Stale air rushed out, dry and still, as if exhaled from a long-forgotten tomb. They stepped inside together. What they saw was not what they expected. No altar, no pews. Instead, rows of shelves, dozens of them. Carefully preserved ledgers, maps, notebooks, each stamped with a symbol they both now recognized. The sunburst around a key. The Sherlock Society. Vivian's voice cracked. My God! At the far end of the chapel, a stone lectern stood beneath a stained glass window. The image depicted not saints, but men in robes, surrounding a spiral staircase that seemed to descend into the earth. Beneath it, carved in Latin, Veritas. In Radis, truth lies in the root. Vivian stepped forward and reached out to one of the ledgers. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, she saw names. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Blanc moved beside her, his voice low. Look. The names weren't just society members. They were targets, judges, politicians, academics, journalists, dates next to their names. And words, altered, discredited, swayed, neutralized. This hadn't just been a philosophical society. It had been a machine. And the doctrine Gideon had found in Marlicombe. It was merely an instruction manual. What lay here, in this chapel, sealed beneath ivy and soil, was the archive of its use. Vivian's eyes brimmed with horror. They didn't hide the truth, Benoit. They stored it. They documented how. They used it. Blanc stared at the stained glass. What do we do? She whispered. Blanc's reply was slow, heavy. We carry it. Carefully, until we understand what to do next. Because the fire in Marlicombe had destroyed the final meeting place. But this was where it had all begun. Chapter 14. The archivist's warning. By the time Benoit Blanc and Vivian Marsh returned to the village, the sun was dipping behind the moors, casting long shadows over the winding lanes of Cotsley. Their boots were wet with chapel moss. Their minds heavy. The discovery inside Greysteel Chapel was not just historical. It was dangerous. Dozens of ledgers still intact. Pages stamped with the sunburst key. Targets. Outcomes. A system of psychological manipulation that predated mass media, but mirrored it eerily. Vivian clutched one of the copied pages in her coat pocket. She had only skimmed it, but one entry chilled her. R. Houghton. Influence local judiciary. Outcome achieved. Position removed. Reputation altered via fabricated debt. Another name was circled. E. Marsh. Academic. Potential threat. Family monitored. Assessment ongoing. Vivian had frozen when she saw it. That's our grandfather. Blanc had said nothing, only nodded grimly. Back in the bed and breakfast where they were staying. A crook-roof inn called the Briar's Gate. They laid out the materials they had retrieved in the locked attic room. Blanc paced as Vivian catalogued the contents of the 3 ledgers they dared to bring with them. They weren't just hiding their knowledge, she said. They were conducting social experiments, nudging public decisions, discrediting voices, reshaping memory. It's predictive psychology, decades before the term existed. Blanc stopped. And someone, somewhere, may still be using it. Vivian looked up. You think it wasn't just Oliver? No, Blanc said flatly. I think Oliver was a fanatic, a disciple, but not the last. There was a knock at the door. They froze. Blanc stepped lightly across the room, looking through the PEE, PHOL, E. It was the innkeeper, an older man named Gus Tilney, who'd barely spoken more than 10 words since their arrival. Blanc opened the door just a crack. "Yes?" Tilney looked nervous. He glanced over his shoulder before holding something out. A letter, unsealed. "I don't want trouble," Tilney said quietly. "But someone left this at the front desk. Said to give it to you before morning. No name." Blanc took the envelope and nodded. "Thank you." Tilney turned and walked quickly away. Vivian was already standing. Blanc opened the letter. Inside was a typed note, printed in a serif font. No handwriting. No header. It read, "You have opened the second door, but the third is already aware of you. Do not try to publish. The truth is only powerful when forgotten." The archivist. They stared at the note. Vivian whispered, "There's a third room?" Blanc's eyes narrowed. "And someone alive who still wants to protect it." He folded the note slowly. "The society may be gone, but its tools, its methods, its caretakers, they've survived, hidden, waiting." He walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Below, on the street, a dark car idled across the road. Blanc muttered, "And I believe we've been followed." That night, neither of them slept much. They rotated watch, locking the attic door and keeping their documents hidden inside the bed frame. But just before dawn, something slipped beneath the door. A second note, this one handwritten, and rushed. "You're not the only one tracing Gideon's work. He sent copies to others, but one of them is missing. And whoever found his copy isn't afraid to kill. Be careful. They're not done cleaning." A friend. Blanc read it twice, then once more aloud. Vivian looked pale. "This is bigger than Marleycombe, bigger than Cotsley." Blanc exhaled. "Yes." He looked at her with steeled calm. "We've pulled a thread, and now the fabric is unraveling." Chapter 15. The recipients. By late morning, the mist had lifted from Cotsley, but inside the attic room of the Briar's Gate, the air remained heavy. Benoit Blanc sat at the small desk, the handwritten note from a friend lying next. To the folded typed message from the so-called archivist, 2 notes, one a warning, the other a threat, both clear. They were not alone in the search. Vivian paced behind him, a notebook in her hand, her brow furrowed in focus. "Gideon told me a few weeks before his death that he'd made contingency plans. He was worried. Said if something happened, at least 2 others would have what they needed to finish the story." She flipped to a page. "One was me. The second was an American, a historian he met during a symposium on secret societies at Cambridge. Dr. Elias Hart, teaches at a university in Boston. Obsessed with fraternal orders and post-Victorian cult structures." Blanc looked up. "And the third?" She frowned. "He wouldn't say." Blanc nodded slowly, "because he didn't trust them." Vivian sat down, chewing the edge of her pen. "He told me once, years ago, the most dangerous people are those who chase truth like a prize, not a responsibility. Maybe the third was someone like that. Or," Blanc added, "someone who already had a stake in preserving the society's silence." Vivian stood. "If Dr. Hart still has his copy, we need to warn him." By afternoon, they were in touch with the U.S. Embassy in London, trying to locate Dr. Elias Hart. It took some effort, and more than one carefully chosen bluff from Blanc, but by early evening, they had an answer. Dr. Hart was currently in the UK on sabbatical, staying in Bath, of all places. 50 miles west, Vivian said, checking the map. 2 hours by car. They were out the door within 15 minutes. Their documents secured in a lockbox, which Vivian strapped inside her travel bag. As the car wound through rolling hills and lavender fields, Blanc sat silently beside her, turning something over in his mind. "Do you believe in destiny, Miss Marsh?" he asked at last. She hesitated. "Not in the mystical sense." But I believe certain things pull toward resolution. Like pressure finding a fault line. Blank nodded slowly. That's what this feels like. Pressure. Old pressure. The kind that was sealed in a vault long ago. And now someone's prying it open with a crowbar. They reached Bath as the sun was falling low. The Roman city cast in shades of honeyed stone and amber light. Dr. Hart's address led them to a townhouse near Queen Square. Respectable, but not ostentatious. Vivian rang the bell. No answer. They tried again. Blank glanced at the window. Shades drawn. Lights off. He stepped back, scanned the narrow street, then checked the front door. Locked, but the mailbox was overstuffed. Pamphlets. Junk mail. A single envelope sticking out. He pulled it free. No stamp. No return address. But on the front, in all caps. Truth. Burns hottest in the hands of fools. Vivian went pale. That's one of the mottos from the Society's internal codebook. Gideon had it circled. Blank looked at her. He's not here. They left a note tucked into the doorframe, posing as visiting scholars, and returned to their car. But as they rounded the corner, a flash of movement caught Blanc's eye. A man in a tan coat was crossing the far end of the street, head down. Fast walk, dark gloves. Vivian noticed too. He was watching the house. Blank was already moving. Come, quickly, don't run. They followed, carefully, turning at the same intersection. But the man was gone. A narrow alley opened between two stone buildings, empty. Only a smell. Lingered oil, matches, a hint of burned paper. Vivian looked down. Ashes. Small. Gray flakes littered the alley, still warm. In the center of the soot lay a black plastic wallet, melted beyond recognition, but with one intact object inside. A scorched university ID card. Dr. Elias Hart. Vivian whispered, "We're too late." Blank picked up the card, his jaw tight. They found the second recipient before we did, and they made sure nothing was left. Later that night, in their hotel room, Vivian sat with her head in her hands. "I thought we were the ones uncovering the truth," she said. "But we're the ones being chased." Blank nodded slowly. "Yes, but not blindly. Whoever sent those warnings, the friend, they're watching too. Maybe from inside." Vivian looked up. "Inside what?" Blanc's eyes were cold and sharp. "Inside whatever is still active." He reached into his bag and pulled out the photocopy of Gideon's map again. 7 points. One recipient is dead. One is hunted. The third ... unknown. Vivian asked quietly, "Do you think he's the killer?" "I think," Blank said, folding the map slowly, "the killer is taking orders. And somewhere, in a chapel, a vault, a country estate, the archivist watches. Chapter 16. The third flame, the following morning, was sharp with wind. The news of Dr. Elias Hart's death had not made any official headlines, only a vague report about a residential fire in Bath with no foul play suspected. But Blank and Vivian knew better. Dr. Hart hadn't died in an accident. He'd been erased. Vivian sat across from Blank in the breakfast room of a modest hotel in Swindon, a place chosen for being unmemorable. She hadn't touched her tea. "They didn't just kill him," she said quietly. "They destroyed everything. His notes, his books, even his name. Nothing left for anyone to ask questions about." Blank nodded grimly. "Which means there's only one recipient left." Vivian pulled out Gideon's journal, the small black book that had become their lifeline. He never wrote their name, but he hinted at them. She opened to a page where Gideon had written, "Some truths can't be trusted to strangers. Some must go to those who've already been burned." Vivian tapped the phrase. He wasn't talking about a scholar or a journalist. This wasn't about intellect. It was personal. Blank leaned forward. Who did he know? Who'd already lost something to the society? Vivian hesitated. There was a girl. They were close. Her name was Emma Northley. They studied together at Oxford years ago. She was brilliant, obsessed with social systems. But she disappeared from academia suddenly. I think her father was disgraced in a case tied to the judiciary. A strange scandal with no clear origin. Blanc's brow furrowed. The same pattern as the names in the chapel archives. She might be connected through her family. Vivian nodded. Gideon once said she understood how control moves beneath conversation. He meant it literally. Emma could read a power game unfolding the way most people read a crossword. Blank stood. We find her now. Emma Northley was harder to trace than expected. No active social media. No recent academic publications. Her last public record, a closed seminar in Cambridge, 6 years ago on ethical silence in information theory. Vivian tapped her laptop. She's either underground or very deliberately out of sight. Blank thought a moment. Then we don't chase her. We draw her out. Vivian looked up. We leak something, Blank said. Something only the 3 recipients would recognize. A symbol, a phrase. We publish it in a place she'd be monitoring, cautiously. Vivian nodded. The society's code phrase. From Gideon's letter, the door was never locked, only remembered. Perfect. They sent it out through a friend of Vivian's, an archivist at a fringe philosophy journal that still maintained a private newsletter. 2 hours later, the phrase appeared in a seemingly innocuous review of an old book on secret orders. Then they waited by nightfall. The response came. Vivian's encrypted inbox pinged with a single message. From an address with no name. Subject line, I remember. The door.body. You're in danger. If you found this, they're watching you already. But if Gideon trusted you, meet me where he last walked freely. 3 p.m. Thursday. The Brasenose. Sundial. Vivian blinked. Brasenose? Oxford. Blank nodded slowly. Where? It began for both of them. They arrived in Oxford early Thursday afternoon. The old university city felt unchanged. Cobbled streets, Gothic archways, golden light on college spires. But for Vivian, it now felt haunted. Her brother had walked here only months before his death. Now they returned not to mourn, but to intervene. The Brasenose sundial was carved into the courtyard wall of the college, beside a patch of carefully tended grass. Students passed by, unaware that something invisible stirred beneath the ancient stone. Blank and Vivian waited near a bench. At 3:02 p.m., Emma Northley arrived. She looked older than Vivian remembered, but only in the way that fire ages paper from the edges inward. Her dark hair was shorter, her eyes sharper. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a gray coat and a bag slung crosswise over her shoulder. Vivian rose first. Emma. Emma nodded slowly. They've started hunting, haven't they? Yes. Blank answered. Emma studied him. I read your name in the back pages of Gideon's ledger. He called you the clean blade. Blank blinked. I'll take that as a compliment. She turned to Vivian. I kept what Gideon gave me, but I've done more than hide it. I've been building a countermap. Vivian stared. A what? Emma unslung her bag and pulled out a folded sheet, hand-drawn, but meticulously layered. Not just where the society buried their knowledge, but where they used it. Traces in case law, committee decisions, ruined careers. I've been tracking patterns. And I think I know who's pulling the strings now. Vivian's voice was tight. The archivist? Emma nodded once. They were never a single person. But there's one who rose to the top. One name that appears in every major purge. Blank leaned closer. Emma whispered, Thaddeus Greysteel. Vivian's heart dropped. The same family who owned the chapel. Emma's voice was calm. Too calm. and the name that disappeared. From all official land ownership records, in 1993, as if they'd never existed, except they still do. Blanc stood up straight. Then it's time we meet the man who's been watching from the center of the web. Chapter 17. The Greysteel Estate, the Greysteel family had always existed like a ghost in the background of British power. Wealthy, discreet, and wholly uninterested in publicity, they owned land across the country, much of it under shell. Companies, and some of it not listed at all. But Thaddeus Greysteel? He didn't exist on paper. No social presence. No photographs. Only whispers. Until Emma Northley pulled out a grainy surveillance image taken by a contact in Brussels. Private estate auction last year. In the background stood an older man in a black coat, his face only half turned, but unmistakable in its resemblance to the stone carving in the stained glass at Greysteel Chapel. She whispered, "That's him." "And he hasn't aged." Vivian stared. "That can't be." "It's not literal," Emma said, shaking her head. "He's aged, but not publicly. There's a reason. The society trained their successors to erase themselves, to live outside of data. No taxes, no photos, no trace." Blanc studied the image and said, "Where?" "Scotland," Emma said. "Northern coast. I traced an estate he purchased under a false identity in the Highlands, 20 miles inland from Thurso. No road signs. Local village calls it Kilshaven House." Vivian leaned in. "You've been there?" Emma nodded. "Only once. I got as far as the gate. That was enough." They watched the perimeter. Cameras, dogs, private security, but dressed like groundskeepers. Blanc's eyes narrowed. "Then it's not just a home," he said softly. "It's the society's last stronghold." The journey north was grim and silent. They traveled by night, avoiding main routes. By the second day, they reached the outskirts of Kilshaven, a windswept village with no pub, no shops, and no signposts. Only a petrol station with a curt clerk, and a map so old it showed telegraph stations. But Kilshaven House still loomed. An old hunting manor, now swallowed by private forest, 10-foot walls, and a gate with no bell. They parked a mile away, approaching on foot through a ridge of heather and pine. The wind carried the scent of salt and frost. No bird sang. Blanc, crouched beside a mossy tree, looked through binoculars. A long driveway. A stone house with black windows. 2 figures. "Not guards, handlers." Emma whispered, "I count 6 cameras. 3 active. The rest are decoys." Blanc nodded, "And the chimney's cold. No fire inside." Vivian frowned. "So no one's home?" Emma's voice was flat. "Or whoever's home doesn't want warmth." They waited until dusk. Then, moving in pairs, they crossed the rear perimeter, avoiding the sensors Emma had noted years ago. At the back of the estate stood an old stone gardener's entrance, its iron lock long rusted, its hinges resistant to silence. Emma produced a small tool from her coat, a handmade skeleton key, made from the same template as Gideon's. She whispered. With a faint click, the gate opened. Inside, the estate was even quieter. Kilshaven House loomed over them like a judgment. Blanc led them through the lower windows. One creaked open, not locked. Dust inside, but not abandonment. It was intentional emptiness. The furniture was immaculate. The floors polished. And in the center of the drawing room, a single object rested on a velvet pedestal. A brass key, identical to Gideon's, but inscribed T3, Custos Veritatis, keeper of the truth. Blanc picked it up. It was heavier, colder. Emma's breath caught. There was a third room. Vivian whispered, "Where?" A sudden creak echoed from upstairs. They froze. Another footstep. Measured, unhurried. Then Silence. Blanc motioned them back toward the shadows, and from the top of the staircase, a voice, dry as paper, called down, "You've come far, but the truth doesn't belong to everyone." They turned. Thaddeus Greysteel stood at the head of the stairs, tall, thin, silver hair combed neatly. His eyes dark and utterly still. "Put the key down," he said, without raising his voice. Blanc did not. Instead, he said, "You've been watching us since Marleycombe." Greysteel gave a faint smile. "I've been watching you since the—" Girl's brother opened the first door. Emma stepped forward. "Why?" "Because curiosity is a virus. And you're all infected." Blanc held up the key. "This leads to what?" he asked. Greysteel replied softly, "To the truth behind the society, to its failure, and to the reason it must never be rebuilt." Vivian's voice was shaking. "Then why preserve it?" Greysteel's smile faded. "Because the truth is a fire, and someone must stand beside it so the world doesn't burn." Chapter 18. The room without windows. Thaddeus Greysteel's footsteps were soundless as he descended the staircase, hands behind his back like a man in a mausoleum. Every inch of Kilshaven House now seemed constructed not for comfort, but containment. He didn't ask who they were. He already knew. Blanc remained composed, still holding the key 3, Custos Veritatis, its weight unnatural in his palm. Greysteel gestured calmly to the north hallway. "If you want answers, you must follow me. But when that key turns, you can't unturn it. The truth you find is not just knowledge, it is responsibility." Emma said nothing, but moved forward. Vivian hesitated. "Why now? Why not kill us? Like you did Elias Hart?" Greysteel paused, not in shame, but calculation. Hart made a choice. He tried to replicate the doctrine, not preserve it. That was the first violation. The second was greed. He turned and continued walking. "We do not kill curiosity. We kill infection." Blanc murmured, "And who decided what was infection?" Greysteel smiled faintly. "The society, and now me." They walked through a door that looked like a pantry, down a flight of stairs that twisted in silence. No dust, no cobwebs. The stone was smooth and dry, the temperature dropping with. Each step. At the bottom, Greysteel stopped at a steel vault door. Unlike the ornate oak of the previous rooms, this door was clinical, reinforced, bolted, and unmarked. Only a small keyhole broke its surface. Blanc stepped forward, inserted the key 3, and turned. There was a click, a groan, and then the door hissed open. Inside lay a room perhaps 20 feet wide, lit by low, golden lights. No windows, no furniture. Only one long table running down the center, covered in folders, reels of tape, photographs, sealed boxes, and dozens of black notebooks. The heart of the Sherlock Society. Greysteel stepped inside last, then locked the door behind him. "This," he said, "is the record of everything the Society did and what they stopped others from doing." Vivian stared in horror. "This isn't history. It's surveillance." Greysteel nodded. "We interfered with elections, suppressed ideologues, protected fragile alliances, removed fanatics before their flames could spread. What MI5 didn't handle, we did." Emma opened a notebook and gasped. "This is a blueprint for political manipulation. Timelines, psychological models, reaction chains." "Of course," Greysteel replied. "Information is nothing. Reaction is power." Blanc moved to a projector at the end of the table. He clicked it. On a reel of film played, black and white footage, a grainy interview. 19.5 2. A man in a tweed jacket speaks to the camera. "We are not conspirators. We are custodians. And masses cannot navigate complexity. Our gift is to remove the burden of choice. Vivian stepped back. They believed this. Graysteel approached, his voice suddenly lower. "Let me tell you what your brother died for, Miss Marsh." She flinched. Graysteel continued, "Gideon thought the truth would liberate people. But truth doesn't liberate. It fractures. It makes them doubt, spin, scream, tear apart what holds them together." He looked at Blanc now. "You think this is evil. I think it's maintenance." Blanc said nothing. His eyes locked on a final black ledger labeled Projection, 2031 to 2040. Inside, predictions. Economic collapses. Civil unrest. Names of influencers flagged for removal. Policies marked as untenable. Algorithms run on national despair. And at the bottom of the last page, the doctrine may no longer be enough. Reversion protocol. Begin phase 3. Emma whispered, "Phase 3? Graysteel's eyes glinted. "The new world doesn't need shepherds. It needs filters. Memory engines. We seeded the tools into your technology years ago. Now they think they're choosing." Vivian stepped back. "You've moved from protecting society to controlling it." Graysteel didn't flinch. "That was always the endgame. We tried to make it gentle." Blanc stepped between them, calm but firm. "And now?" Graysteel's voice turned steel. "Now you walk away. You take the key. You forget this room. You let the world spin in peace, believing it is free." Emma shook her head. "And if we don't?" Graysteel turned to the wall and pressed a switch. A heavy screen descended. On it, a live feed of the outside world. Their hotel, their flat, friends, colleagues, watched, tagged, catalogued. "You are already archived," Graysteel said softly. "One wrong leak, and you disappear." Silence. Then Blanc reached out and shut off the feed. He spoke quietly. "You made one mistake." Graysteel raised an eyebrow. Blanc's voice was low and slow, like thunder in the distance. "You assumed truth must be controlled, because you never trusted people to face it together." Graysteel's face twitched. The first crack in his composure. Emma, standing beside Vivian, whispered, "So what now?" Blanc turned to them both. "We take the doctrine, not to publish it, but to bury it in the open, in places no one owns. Not power, not governance. We break the system that protects this room." He looked at Graysteel one last time. "You're not a custodian. You're a coward. And this ends with the last page." Chapter 19. The break line. For a long moment, there was silence in the vault, the kind that hums just behind the eardrums when the air itself seems to be waiting. Blanc had spoken his verdict. The room had heard it. And Thaddeus Graysteel, who had ruled it like a silent god, now stood still, unreadable, as if unsure whether to act as executioner or witness. Then, softly, he said, "You'll never make it out of here." Blanc didn't flinch. "You've spent your life predicting what people will do. But I don't think you've ever truly watched what someone will do when given something real to fight for." Graysteel's fingers twitched. A signal. A faint click echoed through the walls. Emma spun around. "They've sealed the upper doors," Vivian cursed. "We're locked in." "No," Blanc said calmly. "They think we are." He turned back to the table and picked up one of the black boxes marked Doctrine Fragment Alpha. "You taught fear as method, Mr. Graysteel, but now your own archive is your weakness." He gestured to the bank of drives and reels. "We don't need to carry all this," he said. "Just corrupt it?" Emma nodded, already moving. Gideon built a kill switch protocol into his notes. A digital overwrite that breaks encoded threads inside the society's memory logic. "If I trigger it now." She opened her satchel and removed a slim flash drive. "Everything inside this room becomes incoherent noise." Graysteel's eyes widened. Just slightly. You wouldn't dare, he said softly. Emma's voice cut like a knife. You taught me never to hesitate. She plugged in the drive. The vault lights flickered. Graysteel moved forward, but Blanc stepped between them. A low siren began to rise from the walls, subtle, rising in pitch. Emma whispered, 10 minutes. That's all we've got before the self-encryption floods the archive. Vivian grabbed 3 physical files, names, blueprints, the 2031 to 2040 projection ledger, and let's make the time count. They rushed out of the vault. The back emergency stairwell, intended only for maintenance, was now their path. Emma had mapped it years earlier when she first visited Kilshaven, but it was narrow, uneven, and already pulsing with red lights. They're coming from the south gate, Emma panted. 2 vehicles. Blanc stopped halfway up the stairwell. A security monitor blinked to life. 3 armed men entered through the rear cellar corridor. He turned to Emma. Where's the secondary exit? Emma answered without hesitation. The collapsed boiler shaft. It opens out into the old gorse field, but it hasn't been used in decades. Vivian exhaled. Let's hope it still opens. The shaft door was behind a rusted cabinet in the lower kitchen. Emma wrenched it open with a fire iron. Beyond, a concrete tunnel sloped upward into darkness. Vivian crawled in first. Clutching the ledgers tight to her chest. Emma followed. Then Blanc. Behind them, voices echoed in the corridor. Sharp, tactical. Orders given. Weapons loaded. Inside the tunnel, the light narrowed. Air turned damp and metallic. Rats scurried. Then, a beam of daylight ahead. Vivian kicked through the yaw. Final grate. They emerged behind a hedgerow, coughing and covered in dust. The old gorse field, tangled and forgotten, lay before them. In the distance, a vehicle engine roared, not from the house, but approaching the ridge. Blanc scanned the horizon. We need cover. Now. They sprinted across the field, ducking, into a thicket of trees at the edge of the estate. Emma's hand shook as she activated her mobile beacon, a fail-safe tracker Gideon had given her long ago. It'll ping a safe contact in Glasgow, she panted. If we can reach the main road, someone will meet us there. Vivian glanced behind. They're fanning out. Dogs next, probably. Blanc nodded. Then let's give them something to chase. He reached into his coat and pulled out the original P3, still warm from the vault. He dropped it into a tangle of roots, bait. Let them think we're still here. They reached the road just as headlights appeared from the north. A battered Land Rover, driven by an older woman with sharp eyes and no questions. She jerked her head. Get in. No introductions. No delay. The engine growled, and the Land Rover peeled off down the coastal road, away from Kilshaven, away from the last house of the Sherlock Society. Inside the car, Emma opened her bag and pulled out the drive. Encrypted, she said, but not inaccessible. And we have enough to start breaking the doctrine. Vivian stared out the window, wind in her face, tears at the corners of her eyes. It's over, she whispered. Blanc shook his head gently. No, he said. Now, it begins. Chapter 20. What remains? 3 weeks later. The frost had left the rooftops of London, and spring crept back into the cracks of the pavements, blooming where no one thought to look. In a small townhouse off Gerrard Street, behind blackout curtains and stacks of notebooks, 3 people stared at the future in the form of a single hard drive, the last surviving archive of the Sherlock Society. What Emma, Vivian, and Benoit Blanc had pulled from Kilshaven was incomplete, a fractured doctrine, burned and scrambled by its own encryption protocol. But what remained was enough. Names, strategies, influences, historical shifts that had never made sense. Until now. Emma sat at the long table in the dining room, her laptop open, screen filled with cascading lines of decoding text. She hadn't slept much. But her hands were steady. Vivian stood by the window, watching the street below. We could still leak it. Emma didn't answer right away. Blanc, seated across from her, broke the silence. You could. It would burn across the web in seconds. Social media, fringe press, conspiracy boards, alternative platforms. And then he let the words hang. Emma finished them quietly. They wouldn't believe it. Blanc nodded. Because the truth is too quiet, too meticulous. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And the world is tuned to noise. Vivian turned around. So what then? We protect the legacy? Bury it all over again? No, Blanc said softly. We do the one thing Graysteel was too afraid to do. Emma looked up. Blanc continued. We let people choose. Not with fear, not with manipulation, but with clarity. Vivian frowned. How? Emma turned the laptop toward them. We redact the predictions, the identities, but we publish the methods, the models, the psychological strategies, the linguistic tools. Let academics, ethicists, and artists study it. She hesitated. Let people understand how belief can be built like scaffolding. Blanc smiled faintly. Let them see the machine, so they can decide whether to dismantle it or build something better. Vivian slowly nodded. That's what Gideon would have wanted. Blanc stood. And more importantly, it's what the society never did. The publication launched under a false university name, the Marsh Papers. Released not on news sites, but buried in academic archives, symposium digests, and collaborative, open-source forums. A few picked it up, then a few more. Then someone translated a section into Mandarin, then Spanish. Then it went global, but not viral. It spread slowly, like fungus on a tree, reshaping thought in quiet, insistent ways. Where no headlines, no arrests, no conspiracies cracked wide open, but inside boardrooms, classrooms, ministries, and think tanks, a new awareness stirred. A knowledge. They'd been seen. And across the sea, in an old chapel in Marleycombe, beneath shattered glass and moss-stained pews. Someone laid a brass key on the altar. To keep it. To leave it behind. Epilogue. Benoit Blanc returned to New Orleans a month later. He unpacked, fed his dog, and sat by the window of his study with a glass of bourbon and a note in his hand, written in Gideon's handwriting, found tucked inside the final ledger they saved. If truth is a lock, then let it stay locked until someone loves it enough to knock. Blanc folded the note, placed it back in the drawer, and leaned back. He did not smile, but he felt, for the first time in months, still. Not because the danger was gone, but because the truth had been given back to the world. And now it was. Watching. The end. Benoit Blanc and the key that opened nothing.